So imagine a guy whose entire legacy is built on, like, the most violent right hand in heavyweight boxing history.
Right, just pure terrifying power.
Exactly. A guy who spent a decade just sending opponents into absolute terrifying unconsciousness. Like one lightning-fast explosion and it's over.
Oh yeah, we all know the highlight reels.
Right. Now, imagine that exact same guy standing over a totally defenseless, just exhausted opponent who's trapped against the ropes.
The perfect opening.
Yeah, the weapon is completely loaded. The opening's right there. But instead of throwing the punch, he stands there for like 20 agonizing seconds.
Which feels like a lifetime in a boxing ring.
It really does. He just lowers his hands, stares right into the guy's eyes, and audibly whispers,
I love you. It's just wild. I mean, it is a moment that completely shatters every preconceived notion we have about combat sports, you know?
So sure, yeah.
Because we expect that gladiatorial ruthlessness, especially at the elite championship level. Like, when you step into the ring, the unwritten contract is that both athletes are going to push themselves to the absolute brink to get the win.
Right, you're not there to make friends.
Exactly. So what you just described, it isn't a lapse in technique. It's this profound, jarring short circuit of a fighter's fundamental psychology playing out on live television.
And honestly, that single surreal moment is exactly what we're anchoring our deep dive on today. We are taking you back to April 4th, 2026.
It's such a crazy night.
It really was. We're inside the legendary O2 Arena in London. And this event was billed as this monumental clash of eras, right? A huge heavyweight showdown between two absolute titans who have been circling each other for like a decade.
The hype was definitely real for this one.
Oh, absolutely. So in one corner, you have a 40-year-old Deontay Wilder, the former WBC champion, universally known as the Bronze Bomber.
The knockout king himself.
Yeah. And in the other corner, 42-year-old Derek Del Boy Chisora, the ultimate battle-tested, iron-chinned veteran of British boxing.
And, you know, on paper, the promoters sold this as a nostalgic blockbuster. Two massive punchers, two big personalities, just giving the fans one last tremendous show.
That was the pitch, yeah.
But the reality of what actually unfolded over those 12 rounds, well, it had the boxing world glued to their screens for entirely different and honestly deeply uncomfortable reasons.
Yeah, uncomfortable is definitely the word.
I mean, we are looking at a fight that just devolved from a sporting contest into something that forced everyone watching to confront the darkest realities of aging athletes.
And we aren't just going to, like, read you the punch stats or summarize the judges' scorecards today. That's not what we do here.
No, that would be missing the real story.
Exactly. We're analyzing this whole spectacle through a really specific, fascinating lens, which is the raw, real-time reactions of the R-Boxing Reddit community.
It's such a great source for this.
It really is. We were treating those live fight threads, all the spoiler clips, the immediate post-fight debates. We're treating all of that as a real-time global focus group.
Yeah, because you have tens of thousands of diehard boxing purists documenting their own emotional journey as the fight happens.
Yeah, and reading through those threads, the overriding sentiment from the fans was just this incredible whiplash.
Oh, totally. A complete emotional roller coaster.
Yeah, they went from craving the violence to laughing at the sheer absurdity of the mechanics to ultimately, like, pleading for a medical intervention.
And that subreddit provides such a brilliant sociological mirror. I mean, these are fans who really understand the intricate mechanics of the sport.
Right. And know their stuff, yeah.
So their horror at the technical degradation of these two legends is just incredibly revealing.
So true. So our mission today, we are going to examine the undeniable biomechanical decay of both Wilder and Chisora.
We've got to break down the highly controversial officiating, too, because that infuriated this digital focus group.
Oh, we are definitely getting into the officiating. And most importantly, we are going to confront this profound biological paradox of the granite chin.
That's the heavy stuff, pulling back the curtain on the long-term neurological consequences that the business of boxing so often tries to, sweep under the rug.
Right. So how does a highly anticipated fight between two elite veterans turn into what fans described as two drunk uncles scrapping at a family BBQ?
That description is just so vividly accurate.
Isn't it? Let's start right there, with the immediate aesthetic shock of the fight itself. Because that drunk uncle's comment was actually one of the most upvoted comments in the whole post-fight thread.
I mean, it perfectly captures the vibe.
Yeah, because as a fan tuning in to see world-class athletes, you expect a baseline of physical confidence.
Of course. You expect to see the kinetic chain in action.
Exactly. Power generating from the foot, transferring up through the hips and shoulders, snapping at the end of a punch. But the fans on Reddit noted that all that textbook technique just completely evaporated the second the opening bell rang.
Yeah, and the visual of drunk uncles, it's crude, but biomechanically. It is an incredibly astute observation of what happens to a heavyweight body post-40.
How so? Break that down for us.
Well, boxing is heavily reliant on fast-twitch muscle fibers, right? Specifically the type 2B fibers. Those are the ones that provide explosive, instantaneous power and rapid reflexes.
Okay, it's the stuff you need to throw a knockout punch.
Exactly. And as a human being ages, those specific fibers are the very first things to atrophy. So a fighter can still be massively strong, but the snap, the suddenness of the movement, it just disappears.
Wow, okay. Which explains the windmills.
Oh, the windmills are out of control.
The fans were documenting this laundry list of absurdities in the thread. They said the fight featured dives, tackles, bent refs, fighters falling entirely out of the ring, and just these massive looping windmill punches that missed by a mile.
It really looked less like the pinnacle of the sweet science and more like a desperate bar fight at 2 a.m.
Yeah, why do they resort to that, biologically speaking?
Well, when those fast-twitch fibers degrade, and when the cardiovascular system can no longer clear lactic acid efficiently, the fighter's entire base breaks down.
The footwork, right.
Yes. Footwork is always the first thing to go. You just can't position your legs underneath your center of gravity fast enough to throw a fundamentally sound punch.
So what do you do if you can't use your legs?
You compensate. They start throwing punches using only their shoulders and arms. They throw these wide, sweeping, totally off-balance hooks, the windmills you were talking about.
And they look so clumsy doing it.
Right, because they are completely exhausted, so their equilibrium is compromised. A missed punch like that carries so much ungrounded momentum that the fighter literally falls over.
Which explains the tackles and tumbling through the rope.
Exactly. Yeah. The neurological command to punch is being sent from the brain, but the physical machinery is just too degraded to execute it without them collapsing.
That makes total sense. Actually, the Reddit community dubbed this fight the Kimbo versus Data 5000 of 2026.
Oh man, that is a brutal comparison.
For those listening who might not be steeped in internet combat sports lore, we should probably dissect that reference real quick.
Yeah, definitely explain that one.
So years ago, there's this infamous mixed martial arts fight between two street brawlers, Kimbo Slice and Data 5000. And it is widely considered one of the most mechanically embarrassing fights in modern history.
Primarily because both men suffered from such catastrophic cardiovascular failure.
Yeah. Exactly. The fight actually ended with Data 5000 literally collapsing onto the canvas. Not from a strike, but from renal failure and sheer exhaustion.
So by invoking that specific fight, these hardcore boxing fans are making a devastating critique.
They're saying they're just gassed out.
Worse than that, they're stating that Wilder and Chisora were fighting a battle against their own failing biology rather than actually fighting each other.
Oh, wow. That's rough.
It's the ultimate insult to a professional athlete's conditioning, The fans recognized that the tension of the fight wasn't about who had the better jab.
Or ring control.
Right. The tension was purely about whether these two men's cardiovascular systems could simply survive another 3-minute interval.
And the fans really noted that the survival of one of those men, Chisora, seemed to be heavily subsidized by the referee.
Oh, the threads went crazy over this.
The R-boxing threads absolutely exploded with accusations of structural bias. I mean, they didn't just call the refereeing bad. They used words like disgusting, corrupt, and bent.
Yeah, reading it, it felt like the fans were watching a coordinated heist in real time.
That's a great way to put it. They meticulously documented sequence after sequence where the rules of boxing were ostensibly bent to protect the local British fighter.
And look, the concept of hometown bias is deeply woven into the fabric of international boxing. We all know that.
Right, it's almost expected to some degree.
But the Reddit focus group highlighted specific mechanical violations that crossed the line from subtle favoritism into overt, undeniable interference.
Let's break down those mechanics then, starting with the most glaring example, which happened in round 8.
The knockdown sequence.
Yeah. So Chisora gets knocked down, and he is visibly struggling to get his legs underneath him. And suddenly, his cornermen physically interfere to help him up.
Which is just mind-blowing.
In any standard professional bout, a cornerman physically assisting a downed fighter during a live count is an immediate, indisputable disqualification. The fight should have ended right there on the spot.
100%.
The referee just waves it off and lets the fight continue.
It was egregious. And the fans also heavily scrutinized what they labeled a Tank Davis timeout.
Oh, right. We need to give some historical context for that one so listeners understand the sheer level of frustration in the thread.
Yeah, so Gervonta Tank Davis is an elite modern fighter who occasionally exploits minor equipment issues.
Like a piece of loose tape on a glove.
Exactly, or a supposedly untied shoe. He uses it to force the referee to pause the clock right in the middle of a high-paced round.
It's a classic veteran tactic to buy time.
Yeah.
But how does that biologically change the landscape of a fight between two exhausted 40-year-olds? I mean, a few seconds here or there doesn't matter.
Yeah. Oh, it changes absolutely everything. Look, in the middle of an intense exchange, a heavyweight's body is operating anaerobically.
Meaning without oxygen.
Right. They are burning through ATP, that's adenosine triphosphate, the molecule responsible for explosive muscle contraction. They're burning it faster than their body can synthesize it.
So they're hitting a wall.
Yeah, lactic acid is flooding the muscles, making their arms feel like they're literally filled with cement.
So when the ref pauses it,
when a referee unnecessarily pauses the fight to check tape for 30 or 40 seconds, they aren't just adjusting equipment. They are granting a massive, unearned biological reset.
wow.
They are allowing that fighter's heart rate to drop, the lactic acid to begin clearing, and those ATP stores to partially replenish.
That's huge.
It is. In a fight where cardiovascular survival is literally the only currency left, gifting a 42-year-old fighter a free metabolic recovery window is essentially shifting the entire competitive balance of the round.
And the Reddit community saw right through it. They recognized that the referee was essentially acting as a defibrillator for Chisora's gas tank.
That's exactly what he was doing.
But the absolute peak of the fans' outrage, I mean, the moment the thread went totally nuclear was the scoring.
Oh, the scorecards. Unbelievable.
Despite the knockdowns, despite all the absolute chaos we just talked about, one of the official judges ringside submitted a final scorecard of 115 to 112.
And not for Wilder.
Nope. They didn't score for Deontay Wilder. They scored at 115-112 for Derek Chisora.
To really understand why that specific number enraged the boxing community so much, we have to look at the strict mathematics of the 10-point must system.
Let's do the math for them.
So in professional boxing, the winner of a round generally receives 10 points and the loser receives 9.
Okay, simple enough.
However, if a fighter scores a clean knockdown, the loser's score drops to an 8. So a knockdown round is scored 10-8.
Right, so it's a massive mathematical swing. And Wilder scored multiple knockdowns in this fight.
He did.
And the fans in the thread were doing this math in real time. For a judge to arrive at a final score of a 115-112 in favor of Chisora, that judge would essentially have to give Chisora every single non-knockdown round of the entire fight.
Which is completely insane.
They would have to look at a stumbling, exhausted fighter who's getting repeatedly dropped and somehow decide he possessed superior ring generalship and effective aggression for 30 out of the 36 minutes.
It is statistically and visually absurd. I mean, ring generalship implies controlling the pace and the geography of the ring.
And effective aggression implies landing clean, consequential punches while moving forward.
Exactly. And the Reddit consensus was that Chisora was doing neither of those things. He was merely surviving.
Barely surviving.
So this scorecard just validated the deepest, most cynical fears of the fan base, that a foreign fighter traveling to the UK must secure a devastating knockout, because the structural apparatus of the event, the ref, the judges, is engineered to shepherd the local hero to a decision.
Yet one prominent comment in the thread actually stated that if they were a rising contender, they would permanently boycott fighting in the UK, based entirely on the mathematical gymnastics of this one scorecard.
And you really can't blame them for feeling that way.
But the twist in this whole bizarre narrative is that the hometown heist ultimately failed. Deontay Wilder still managed to pull out the victory on the other scorecards.
Barely, but he did.
He survived the family BBQ, he survived the bent referee, and he survived the judges. But the Deontay Wilder that walked out of the O2 arena with his hand raised, he was a completely unrecognizable entity to the fans who have followed his whole career.
So true.
The central pillar of his athletic identity had just vanished.
And you see this pivot in the Reddit threads. They transition from analyzing the referee to performing this deep psychological autopsy on Wilder.
Because he looked so different.
Yeah, because for a decade, Deontay Wilder was the most terrifying apex predator in the sport.
He wasn't exactly a technician, though.
No, not at all. He was never a master technician. He didn't have the slick footwork of an Alexander Usyk or the defensive wizardry of a Tyson Fury.
He just had power.
But what power? He had the ultimate equalizer, a straight right hand that generated such immense localized kinetic energy that it just bypassed an opponent's consciousness entirely.
And he was so aggressive with it.
Exactly. Paired with that physical tool was a ruthless killer instinct. When Wilder hurt an opponent back in the day, he didn't calculate. He swarmed.
He would just go for the kill.
He threw caution to the wind and pursued the knockout with an aggression that bordered on actual malice.
Yeah, we used to talk about that right hand like it was a mythological weapon.
Yeah.
But the fans scrutinizing this fight were completely baffled by his performance.
They couldn't believe what they were seeing.
They noted a glaring, persistent physical hesitation. Over and over the threads, they pointed out that he consistently refused to, quote, let the right hand go.
The openings were right there.
They were. Chisora was plodding forward. His hands were dropping lower and lower as the exhaustion set in. The target was wide open. Wilder had the weapon loaded, his finger resting squarely on the trigger, and his brain simply refused to send the signal to fire.
And the fans zeroed in on this specific paralysis. They were asking, why can't he pull the trigger anymore? It used to be a matter of time before the other guy was on Bambi legs.
And what did the digital focus group decide?
Well, the collective intelligence of that Reddit community diagnosed the issue not as a physical decay, but as a profound psychological trauma.
Wow, psychological.
Yeah. The prevailing theory in the threads was that Wilder lost the spark after Hellenius.
Okay, let's explore the psychology of that. Because Robert Hellenius is a fighter that Wilder fought a few years prior to this.
A really scary knockout.
It was genuinely difficult to watch. It ended in the first round. Yeah. Hellenius was hit with a short right hand, collapsed instantaneously, and just lay on the canvas with his eyes wide open, completely unresponsive.
It was terrifying.
So the fans are suggesting that inflicting that level of catastrophic trauma actually broke something fundamental inside of Wilder's own mind.
It's a really compelling theory. In combat sports, we rarely talk about the psychological burden of being the inflictor of violence.
We usually just praise the tough guy taking the hit.
Right. We focus entirely on the resilience of the person taking the punch. But when an athlete possesses true lethal power, they eventually have to confront the reality of what that power actually does to another human being.
Seeing the aftermath up close.
Exactly. When you stand over a man whose neurological system has just completely crashed because of your fist, when you see the ringside doctors rush in with oxygen tanks, it forces a hyper-awareness of mortality.
It's the sudden realization that you aren't just playing a sport anymore. You possess the actual capacity to end a life.
Yes, and as an athlete ages, as they have children, as they mature beyond that invincible mindset of their 20s, that realization calcifies into hesitation.
The brain gets in the way of the body.
Precisely. The amygdala, the fear center of the brain, starts projecting the consequences of the punch before the motor cortex can even execute it.
You start seeing the stretcher before you even throw the cross.
That is exactly what the fans mean when they say he lost the spark. The innate sociopathic aggression required to be an elite knockout artist has been replaced by empathy.
And empathy is not great for boxing.
In a boxing ring, empathy is a paralyzing liability.
Which brings us perfectly back to the most surreal moment of the night. Round 8, we really have to dissect this sequence because it just perfectly encapsulates that paralyzing empathy we're talking about.
It's the defining moment of the fight.
Yeah. Wilder catches Chisora, knocks him completely through the ropes. Chisora scrambles back into the ring, his legs are completely gone, and he barely beats the referee's count.
He is dead to rights.
Totally. His hands are down, his eyes are glassy. The fans in the spoiler thread were anticipating the vintage Wilder windmills to come flying in to end the fight right then and there.
Because the opening is vast. The physical cues for a knockout blow are all completely present.
But Wilder freezes. For 20 seconds, he just stands in front of Chisora. He physically cocks his right hand back. The kinetic energy is stored.
And then nothing happens.
He looks Chisora dead in the eyes, and the microphones pick up Wilder clearly saying, "I love you."
That's crazy.
And then, instead of firing the punch, he just steps forward and physically pushes Chisora back out of the ring.
Yeah.
It is pure, unadulterated theater.
It really is, and the Reddit community instantly recognized the theatrical nature of the moment. They actually drew a brilliant parallel to professional wrestling.
Oh, the Shawn Michaels comparison.
Yeah, they compared it to the iconic WrestleMania match where Shawn Michaels is preparing to end Ric Flair's career.
That's such a classic wrestling moment.
Right, Michaels is standing over crying, beaten Flair. He pauses, mouths the words, "I'm sorry, I love you," and then delivers the final, finishing kick.
It's a fantastic cultural touchstone, but it highlights a massive, terrifying difference here.
A huge difference.
Because in professional wrestling, that sequence is a meticulously scripted emotional beat, right? It's designed to elicit tears from the audience. Both performers know exactly what is happening. They are collaborating safely.
Exactly.
But in a professional boxing match, there is no script. There are very real, very permanent concussions on the line. For a fighter to pause a live, unscripted combat scenario to deliver a soliloquy of love, it is mind-bending.
And post-fight, Wilder actually leaned right into this narrative.
They did, didn't he?
Yeah, he claimed in the press conference that he actively spared Chisora because he didn't want to inflict serious neurological damage. He said they are, quote, brothers in the sport.
And this triggered a massive, polarizing debate within the fan base. Is this a genuine act of profound human mercy, or is it a psychological defense mechanism?
Where do you land on it?
Well, looking at the skepticism in the Reddit thread, I heavily lean toward the latter. It feels like a convenient narrative constructed after the fact.
Like he's making an excuse.
Yeah, think about it like this. If a superhero suddenly develops a profound moral crisis in the middle of battling a villain and refuses to use their heat vision because they suddenly realize it burns people, we'd question their capacity to be a superhero.
Right. That's a really good point.
Is Wilder actually sparing him out of brotherly love? Or is that just an incredibly noble-sounding excuse for a fighter whose aging brain has simply lost the neural pathways required to pull the trigger?
The division in the thread perfectly mirrors the complex psychology of aging athletes.
Because some fans believed him.
Some fans took Wilder completely at his word, yeah. Though they did note that he should have kept his mercy to himself rather than humiliating Chisora by bragging about sparing him in a press conference.
Yeah, that's a bit insulting to your opponent.
But the more cynical and perhaps more psychologically astute fans, they viewed it exactly as a coping mechanism.
An ego defense.
Yes. Admitting that your body and mind can no longer perform the one action that defined your entire existence, that is a terrifying ego death.
So it's easier to say you chose not to.
Exactly. If you can't pull the trigger, it is infinitely easier on your psyche to tell the world, I consciously chose not to, rather than confessing I am physically and mentally incapable of doing it anymore. The narrative of mercy protects the ego from the reality of decline.
But regardless of whether it was genuine mercy or just a masking of his own decay, the sheer fact that Wilder, the referee, and the millions of fans watching all collectively felt that Derek Chisora needed to be saved, well, that forces us to pivot to the darkest element of this deep dive.
Chisora's medical reality.
Yeah, this is where the Reddit focus group abruptly stopped making jokes and transitioned into a state of profound alarm.
The tonal shift in the digital conversation was so jarring. The jokes about drunk uncles just evaporated. They were replaced by this sort of armchair neurology.
Fans were getting really worried.
They were meticulously cataloging the sheer volume of unprotected shots Chisora was absorbing. They were analyzing his post-fight interviews, noting that his typical brash demeanor was completely gone, just replaced by utter devastation.
But the most alarming observation was the auditory one, wasn't it?
Yeah. Fans uniformly pointed out that his speech was uncharacteristically thick and slurry.
One user bluntly crystallized the mood of the thread, stating, quote, Chisora odds on for early dementia, but one of the richest journeymen to do it.
Ouch. That's bleak.
It is bleak. But that comment highlights a massive, uncomfortable paradox in how we consume combat sports. I call it the spectacle versus safety paradox.
How so?
Well, if you look at the architecture of the Reddit thread, you see intense cognitive dissonance playing out in real time.
Oh, absolutely. You see internet culture doing what it does best, which is utilizing humor to mask discomfort.
Making memes out of tragedy.
Exactly. The top comments are relentlessly memeing Chisora's physical state.
Yeah.
Because he looked so exhausted, they were calling him the Burger King.
And the fast food tournament idea.
Right. They were pitching these absurd future matchups, suggesting he fight fellow heavyweights Derek Lewis or Andy Ruiz Jr. in a tournament to unify the Five Guys belt and the McBelt.
They are literally commodifying his physical decline into a punchline.
It's the modern digital coliseum. We want the blood, but we want it packaged as a meme so we don't have to feel guilty about watching it.
But the whiplash occurs when you scroll down just a quarter of an inch in the exact same thread.
The tone changes instantly.
Yeah, the very same users who were just pitching the Five Guys belt are suddenly dropping the irony and pleading for a medical intervention.
They start typing things like, they both really need to be saved from themselves.
They acknowledge the slurred speech. They are acutely aware of the compounding brain damage.
It's like they are actively consuming the spectacle while simultaneously mourning the irreversible physical costs the athlete is paying to provide that exact spectacle.
It is a heavy, almost unbearable burden for a fan to realize that the entertainment they are cheering for is actively accelerating another human being's cognitive decline.
Yeah, and amidst all this cognitive dissonance, one Reddit user made an observation that absolutely cuts to the biological core of why this fight was so hard to watch.
What did they say?
This user, someone who claimed to have followed Chisora's entire career, noted a terrible irony. They suggested that Chisora might actually be, quote, better off if his chin wasn't so good.
When I read that, it literally stopped me in my tracks.
It's profound.
It is, because in the mythology of boxing, a granite chin is universally praised as a fighter's most valuable asset. The ability to take a massive punch, absorb the impact, and remain conscious is romanticized as the ultimate symbol of toughness and heart.
But this fan realized the dark side of that.
Exactly. They realized that biologically, it is a catastrophic flaw. Let's dig deep into the medical science of that.
All right.
Why does a human being get knocked out in the first place?
Okay, to understand the tragedy of the granite chin, we have to look at the biomechanics of a knockout. When a fighter takes a clean punch to the jaw, the force causes rotational acceleration of the skull.
The head snaps around.
Right. And the brain, which is essentially a gelatinous mass floating in cerebrospinal fluid, lags behind the movement of the skull.
So it hits the inside of the skull.
Exactly. It crashes into the inner wall of the cranium. And the brainstem, specifically the reticular activating system which controls consciousness, is torqued and overwhelmed by the sudden electrical and kinetic surge.
So what does the body do?
To protect the system from further catastrophic damage, the brain essentially trips the circuit breaker. It shuts the power off. The fighter goes unconscious, their muscles go limp, and they fall to the canvas.
It's the body's ultimate fail-safe mechanism. The power goes out to protect the house from a massive electrical surge.
That's a great way to think about it.
And the fight ends. And crucially, the fighter takes no more damage that night.
Precisely. The knockout is biologically protective. But a fighter with a granite chin like Chisora possesses a physiological anomaly, perhaps thicker neck musculature that prevents rapid skull rotation, or a jaw structure that dissipates the kinetic transfer differently.
So he just eats the punch.
Yeah, he doesn't go down. The circuit breaker never trips.
Which means instead of taking one massive concussive blow, going to sleep and going home, he stays awake.
For the whole fight.
Right. He stays in the ring for 36 grueling minutes, absorbing hundreds of repetitive subconcussive blows.
And neurologically speaking, those subconcussive blows are the silent killers. Every time that heavy thudding jab snaps his head back, the brain is still sloshing through the cerebrospinal fluid.
Doing damage on a microscopic level.
Yes. The axons, the long, thread-like parts of the nerve cells that conduct electrical impulses, are being stretched and sheared. Over a 15-year career of 12-round wars, this constant, low-level axonal shearing causes the buildup of an abnormal protein called tau.
The tau protein, right? That's the CTE link.
Exactly. The tau protein clumps together, slowly strangling the healthy brain cells. This is the physiological pathway to chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE.
So his toughness is his undoing.
By being physically too tough to be knocked out early, his brain is absorbing an exponentially higher volume of trauma over the long term.
That Reddit user perfectly diagnosed the tragedy. We've praised the chin as armor, but it's actually a trap. I keep coming back to the analogy of an automobile crumple zone.
That's a really apt comparison.
Think about it. Automotive engineers design the front end of a car to be a crumple zone, right? It is explicitly designed to crush, fold, and destroy itself upon impact.
To save the people inside.
Exactly. By crushing, it dissipates the kinetic energy of the crash before that energy can reach the passenger cabin. If you built a car out of solid titanium with no crumple zones, the frame of the car would survive the crash perfectly intact.
Not a dent on it.
Right. But the engine block, The electronics and the passenger inside would absorb 100% of the violent shockwave. The passengers would be pulverized, while the exterior of the car looked completely fine.
That is an impeccably accurate analogy for Derek Chisora's physiology. The structural integrity of his jaw, his lack of a crumple zone, is actively betraying his neurological health.
The jaw survives, but the brain doesn't.
The jaw survives the impact, the pride survives. But his brain, the passenger inside the cabin, is absorbing the entire shock of a Deontay Wilder right hand over and over again.
It's just terrifying to think about.
And the fans on Reddit are deeply unsettled because they are watching that passenger take the damage in real time, evidenced by the slurred speech and the hollowed-out demeanor.
Which catapults us into the agonizing, unavoidable conversation about an exit strategy. We have this glaring, neon-lit clash between the absolute medical necessity of immediate retirement and the fighter's stubborn, almost delusional desire to keep competing for just one last farewell win.
The farewell win is such a dangerous concept.
It really is, because the fans in the O2 Arena clearly wanted to see their local legend go out on his shield. The referee arguably bent the rules to help manufacture that fairy tale ending, and the fighter himself is deeply addicted to the only life he knows.
They are addicted to all of it.
Yeah, the roar of the crowd, the massive paychecks, the structured discipline of the training camp, and just the identity of being a gladiator. But the biology is screaming for it to stop.
The transition from active competitor to retired civilian is the most dangerous period in any athlete's life.
But especially in boxing.
Right, because the stakes are unimaginably high. The cost of staying too long is your cognitive future. Recognizing the decline and actually executing the decision to hang up the gloves are two entirely distinct processes.
Everyone else can see it but them.
Exactly. Chisora's management sees it. The fans on Reddit see it. The commentators see it. But the fighter, whose entire psychological architecture is built on the unwavering belief that he is indestructible, is always the absolute last person to look in the mirror and accept the truth.
So, if the fighters refuse to make the call themselves, what is the logical path forward?
Yeah.
The Reddit community, sort of acting as a massive crowdsourced matchmaking and retirement planning committee, took it upon themselves to map out the exit strategy for this entire generation of heavyweights.
And they had some very specific ideas.
Let's look at how the internet is trying to navigate the end of an era.
Well, for Derek Chisora, the Reddit consensus is absolute, unanimous, and uncompromising.
He's done.
Immediate retirement, no farewell tours against lower-tier fighters, no novelty unification bouts for the Five Guys belt. He must vacate the premises of professional boxing today to preserve whatever cognitive function he has left.
That seems to be universally agreed upon. But for Deontay Wilder, the situation is vastly more complicated, isn't it?
It is, because Wilder technically won the fight, and because he still holds immense global brand recognition. So the path forward for him is heavily debated and deeply cynical.
The fans were mapping out a literal hit list in the threads. They pointed out that the absolute apex predators of the current heavyweight division superstars like Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, the undisputed king Alexander Usyk, and even terrifying fast-rising prospects like 21-year-old Moses Atoma.
All of them.
Yeah, they are all lining up to call out Wilder right now on social media.
And the fans are acutely aware of the underlying economics behind these callouts.
It's not about proving who's best anymore. No. These elite fighters aren't calling out Deontay Wilder because they want to genuinely test their skills against the legendary Bronze Bomber. They are calling him out because they smell blood in the water.
It is the harsh, predatory economics of the fight game in action. In boxing, risk and reward govern every single matchmaking decision.
And Wilder is high reward, low risk right now.
Exactly. A legendary name with a massive fan base who has visibly lost his killer instinct and refuses to pull the trigger on his right hand is the most valuable commodity on the market.
Like fresh meat for the young guys.
For a rising star like Atama, it's a chance to build a legacy off a famous name with almost zero risk of being knocked out.
And for the older guys.
For a peer like Anthony Joshua, it's a massive, stadium-filling payday against an opponent who mathematically presents a fraction of the danger he did 5 years ago.
But the Reddit fans aren't just pointing out the vultures circling. They actually laid out a very specific, highly cinematic roadmap for how they want this era to officially conclude.
They basically wrote a movie script.
What does the digital hive mind actually want these guys to do to wrap up the 2020s heavyweight saga neatly?
The fans argue that the only fight that makes logical, narrative, and financial sense for Deontay Wilder now is a massive, long-overdue showdown with his British rival, Anthony Joshua.
They're the fight we've been waiting years for.
Right. And the internet's proposed sequence goes like this. First, you book Wilder versus AJ. The logic is that this matchup serves a dual purpose.
Oh, cheers.
It either gives Joshua a high-profile, relatively safe victory to fully restore his confidence and marketability, or it provides the stage for one final, shocking, miraculous knockout upset for Wilder. A true last hurrah.
The classic Hollywood ending.
Exactly. Following that fight, the roadmap dictates that the winner, which the consensus assumes will be Joshua, moves on to finally fight Tyson Fury,
To settle the British rivalry once and for all.
resolving the decade-long debate over who is the supreme, undisputed British heavyweight of their generation, and then the critical, mandatory final step of the Reddit roadmap.
What's the final step?
Immediately after the final bell of that Fury fight, all three men, Wilder, Joshua, and Fury, must collectively and permanently announce their retirement from the sport.
As a fan who has followed these storylines for a decade, I mean, that sounds incredibly neat and tidy. It ties up all the loose ends, resolves the rivalries, and puts a perfect bow on the era.
It's an aesthetically pleasing timeline.
It is. But looking at the reality of the biomechanics we just discussed for the last hour, I have to push back hard on this fantasy booking.
Why is that?
Well, if the overwhelming consensus of these very same fans is that Deontay Wilder is not just washed, but completely beyond washed, and if we've agreed that he has lost his killer instinct to the point where he's verbally apologizing and declaring his love for opponents mid-round,
Yeah.
isn't putting him in the ring with a still prime, physically explosive Anthony Joshua just a wildly dangerous, deeply irresponsible mismatch?
That's a very fair question.
Are the fans genuinely asking for a logical sporting conclusion to an era? Or are they secretly just asking for a sanctioned execution to satisfy their own need for narrative closure?
Oof. That question strikes right at the heart of the ethical hypocrisy of sports fandom.
It's hard to ignore.
And one highly upvoted Reddit user actually called out the thread on this exact point.
What did they say?
They responded to the Wilder versus AJ roadmap by stating, quote, "You got no shame at all, do you? AJ is still in his prime while Wilder is beyond washed. This is a dangerous mismatch and a lame excuse to see Wilder KO'd badly."
Wow. Good for them for calling it out.
Right. That comment exposes the lingering bloodlust that still exists within the fan base, even when it is carefully masked as a desire for a logical career conclusion.
We want the pristine, cinematic ending, but we are completely ignoring the severe physical toll it takes to produce that ending. Totally. It feels like the fans are treating these men like action figures. We just want to smash the plastic toys together one last time before we put them back in the toy box and move on to the newer models.
That's a perfect way to describe it. And if we look at the sober analytical breakdown from the hardcore boxing purists in the thread, they wrap up the entire debate by highlighting a massive, undeniable reality about the current landscape of the sport.
That there's a huge gap now.
There is currently a vast, unbridgeable technical and physical gap between the top 3 or 4 guys in the heavyweight division and these aging veterans.
The game has moved on.
The elite tier, the U6, the prime Joshuas, they are operating at a completely different speed. They have different reflexes, different cardiovascular outputs, and vastly superior tactical sharpness.
So Wilder can't hang with them anymore.
No. Now, the promoters might still want to book Wilder for a massive Las Vegas spectacle because his name value alone still sells millions of pay-per-views.
Money always talks.
But from a purely competitive athletic standpoint, the Digital Focus Group has declared that the era of the Bronze Bomber and Del Boy has permanently passed. The guard hasn't just changed, it has entirely left them behind.
So we have traveled an incredible distance in this deep dive today. I mean, we started by stepping into the O2 arena, expecting to witness a clash of titans.
And we got a very different show.
We did. Instead, we found ourselves analyzing a bizarre, chaotic, meme-filled spectacle that fans could only describe as a family BBQ brawl. We broke down the biomechanics of aging fast-twitch muscle fibers, explaining why legends devolve into windmills and exhaustion.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We analyzed the controversial mechanics of the Tank Davis timeout and the sheer mathematical absurdity of a 115-112 scorecard in a fight with multiple knockdowns.
And we also dissected the profound psychological trauma of the knockout artist, right? Exploring how a terrifying killer instinct can erode into paralyzing empathy, leading to that surreal, unscripted 20-second pause.
The I love you moment.
Exactly. And we confronted the grim biological reality of neurological degradation, unpacking the tragic irony of the granite chin as a failed crumple zone that protects the jaw but sacrifices the brain to subconcussive shearing.
And finally, we looked at the internet's desperate attempt to map out a clean, cinematic retirement plan for an entire generation, weighing our desire for narrative closure against the very real danger of demanding one last, highly dangerous mismatch.
It is an overwhelming amount to process.
It really is. It is a fascinating, deeply contradictory, and ultimately sobering look at the brutal machinery of the sport of boxing and the psychology of the people who consume it.
And it leaves us standing face to face with a lingering structural question about the sport itself, because this fight highlighted a dark, undeniable reality of combat sports.
Yeah, it did.
We saw a referee allegedly trying to manipulate the clock and the rules to shepherd a fading local hero to a farewell win. We saw an opponent actively deciding not to throw a knockout punch, suppressing his own competitive instincts because he legitimately feared for the other man's life.
The ultimate safety net in that ring was coming from the opponent's empathy, not from the doctors, the referee, or the corner.
Which forces us to ask a really difficult question. When the referee, the opponent, and the thousands of fans sitting on Reddit are all significantly more aware of and concerned about a fighter's long-term safety than the fighter himself is.
Right.
Does the sport of boxing need a structural, objective mechanism to force athletes into retirement?
That's a heavy thought.
Should a fighter's eligibility be determined by mandatory, rigid neurological biomarkers and brain scans, rather than leaving it up to the fading, pride-fueled judgment of a man whose entire identity is tied to never surrendering?
A mandatory retirement mechanism dictated by medical science, rather than just waiting for an athlete to take one punch too many. It's a concept that directly challenges the very independent, Wild West nature that boxing was built upon.
It would change the sport entirely.
It would. We want to leave you, the listener, to ponder that line today.
Yeah.
Where's the exact boundary between chasing athletic glory and engaging in stubborn, catastrophic self-destruction? And whose responsibility is it to step in and stop the fight when a legend crosses that line?
Something to really think about.
Absolutely. Keep those physiological crumple zones and that psychological killer instinct in mind the next time you see a revered veteran stepping through the ropes for just one more fight. Until next time, keep digging deeper.